Good night, everyone who is here promptly. One, two. Good evening, everyone. Oh, I'm in the frame. I do not want to be in the frame. Good night, everyone. My name is Jody Menace. I'm the gallery manager of TERN Gallery, and I would like to thank you all for coming tonight in person and online to this second iteration of our Colonial Swag panel discussions in collaboration with the University of the Bahamas. So we are joined by Diandra Ambrister, Natino Thompson, Ide Thompson, and Matthew Rahming, and April Bay as well, virtually. So we're going to jump right into our discussions, and we will be hearing from Ide Thompson first.
Good night, everyone. Can you hear me well? Right? Okay. So, as I'm a poet, I usually start things off with poetry. So I'm going to read a little bit from this poem by Desiree Seabailey before I begin my remarks. It's from a poem Woman in Dublin. It reads, I iron, real street, folkloric and mad, true. Take a good look at the devil, peer into the dread, men surrendered to wound, drunk, calcified, but I fantastic. Chasing echoes, nailed the system, free in sound. I, a fact, answer of my own making. Um, and I just wanted to read little um, bit of a poem because it got me thinking about the ways in which colonialness lives in the body, the ways in which the bodies of women and queer individuals in spaces of the Bahamas exist in a constant state of incarceration in particular ways. Um, yeah. So I begin my bishop with this. I ask myself this daily. What does it mean to live in a queer body in a colonial space? By what powers and means does a queer body become part of a queer landscape? And are there ways to make a queer body visible that offer ways of visibility beyond tropes of spectacle and beyond tropes of decadence and death? April Bay's colonial swag has given me a new visual language to contemplate the positionality of my queer body. In addition, colonial swag also leads him to explore the relationship between colonialism, the queer body and representation, and the natural environment. Colonialism, as we've come to know, it is inherently a function of extraction and exploitation of resources, culture, and identity for the enhancement of some outside society. Colonial swag asks us to see through the metaphors of colonialism and turn it on its head, redress colonialism's expectations in the world of Atlantica, to redress the long held discrimination and disavowal of queer identity and queer life in the Bahamas, and how, through a revisualization of these forms, queer people can advocate for all the social, political, and economic affordances we are meant to enjoy as vital members of Bahamian society. Colonial swag's representation of queerness in the Bahamas begins from its queer use of color and style. The pieces are saturated by deep and regal blues, reds, purples, oranges, pinks, yellows, and greens. This color palette attempts to render the queer Bahamian body in alien royal fashion. It is through this attempt to create an alien colonial lens that reverence is given for the queer bodies displayed. The intentionality of care and use of luxury colors, when combined with the carefree and relaxed stances of the participants, attempts to send a message that queer individuals are sacred, vital, and should be respected and celebrated. The images of the queen, in contrast, are meant to evoke a sense that the queen is behind bars of her own making, while the participants in the ad campaign are now free to be their own true selves. The use of the queen behind bars is meant to make a clear statement. However, I think there's a disconnection between what is meant to be said and what can be received from the use of the Queen's images. I feel this is especially true given recent conversations around the joint head of state positions of the UK sovereign in several Anglophone Caribbean countries, and along with recent events surrounding colonial era statues in the Bahamas. While it's clear that Bahamians, particularly queer Bahamians, have a certain love for pomp and pageantry, there's also a certain level of distaste with the monarchy and what it represents. I'm not sure that the sense of displeasure comes through clearly enough through the work. Even with the Queen meant to be read in a position of imprisonment, I wonder whether this incarceration is evocative enough to ring true of an ad campaign from an Afrofuturist extraterrestrial world. In light of what I've said, the question must be asked: how effective were the intentions behind this work? As a queer Afro Bahamian myself, with a vested interest in queer work that seeks to begin the liberation of queer Bahamians, I find that exhibit in some ways left me understimulated when it came to the messages of the work. While I certainly love the aesthetic choices of colonial swag, what I find concerning is the undercurrents of what can be interpreted as an undercritique of the immense issues plaguing the queer community in the Bahamas. Furthermore, as Bay's work in Atlantica and Colonial Swag is grounded in part on the use of Afrofuturist ideologies, I'm still waiting for my imagining to be opened up, not just dazzled. Yeah, thank you.
Testing, testing. You can hear me now? Okay. So let's start that again. Okay, so the colonization process is one of erasure, right? The colonizing country or the colonial country comes in and they impose their values, their cultural values, their religion, their language onto the people who are in that space. What we find in particular when we're thinking about, I guess, British culture that we know, the well, what we know thus far is it's a very conservative, very proper, very put put together kind of culture. And so, of course, if you're going to think about the people who are going to be colonized, um, they're going to be constructed in opposition to this idea of what British colonialism is, right? And so, what makes them, their vibrancy, their vivaciousness, their gender expression, their language, the beauty of that language, all of that kind of gets swallows up, right? Um, in particular, I also want to say when we're thinking about colonization and sexual orientation, what happens, I think, is a very heteronormative culture gets established as the standard, right? And so, of course, because queerness is everything or should be everything that this colonizing country or culture is not, um, queerness as we know it kind of or takes on this very improper, very loud, very colorful kind of identity, right? And we see that in Bay's work. What's really interesting for me, and I think, not necessarily I think, but what we've seen or heard Dr. Bailey and Dr. Smith talk about last week on Saturday is, there's the question of, well, what makes this exhibition queer? Right? So we can't just, and I think we have this kind of expectation for queerness in particular to be this very showy, very loud, but also um kind of performative um yeah, kind of performative thing. So even for the people who are present in these works, it's like, well, the only way that you know that they are queer, well, personally for me, is because I know most of these faces that are on the walls, right? Um, when you consider the materiality of the work, of course, there is a queerness that's been ascribed to the material. So when you think about the glitter, when you think about the fur, you think about the leather, these are all materials that have been associated or have been connected to the queer community. And so I appreciate um, the kind of subversion or the reclamation of these materials to make a stance. So the exhibition is very colorful. It's very, we're here, we're queer, we're not going anywhere. And I appreciate Bay's attempt. Well, I appreciate Bay's attempt to really centralize or put a focus on queer Bahamians in particular, right? And to kind of juggle what our understanding of what queerness should be. We know that walking around, you can't just, or you shouldn't be able, well, not shouldn't be able, but queerness often has markers, right? Because people don't necessarily have a way to, they're not going to hold up a sign that says like, hey, I'm queer, look at me. But there are certain ways that queer people have been able to announce their queerness over the years. And so, like, again, we're going to go back to the materiality. So for some people, for men in particular, or even for women, it'll be like certain haircuts or certain hair colors or certain tattoos or facial piercings. So we use these markers to announce queerness, but I'm going to say again that in this exhibition in particular, you don't necessarily see that. And so it becomes a statement that queer people should just be. We don't necessarily need these markers to say, like, hey, this is who I am. It's an attempt, I think, by the artist to normalize, as I said, our understanding of queerness. In this space in particular, I appreciate that it's not so much a spectacle as queer people often can be, especially in the Bahamas and especially when you are exhibiting your queerness in certain ways. This is not a spectacle. The models made a very deliberate choice to be photographed, to be the subjects of this artwork. And so I appreciate that there is a challenge of as I said, our typical understanding of what queerness might look like. As Ide said before, I think one of the main issues for me though is um, I know that the piece says colonial swag, and I know that there is importance in the reclamation of certain terms. We have seen that with the word queer in particular, because for a lot of people, for a long time, that was a slur. In particular, though, for colonial swag, I don't necessarily feel, as Ide says, that might that's really a term that we can reclaim. Um, I'm going to also agree that even though the queen is behind bars, it's I think that we should problematize her presence here in the exhibition. Sure, she's behind bars, but and it's a pretty cage, sure. However, she is still in full regalia. She's not been stripped or exploited in the ways that queer people have been, and especially the colonial subjects of the properties, sorry, the countries that have been colonized. So all of these things must be problematized. So on one hand, it's a beautiful exhibition. There's no denying the fact that it is a statement for a lot of queer people. It might be empowering, but there are also some things that have to be problematized, and that's in particular that there is a figure within the exhibition who still holds prominence, like despite seemingly being behind bars or seemingly being imprisoned. It still needs to be problematized. And that's my bit.
Okay, so it's so I have a lot to say. I think I'll start with this: that I can tell that there was time and energy that went into each and every piece, right? You can see that. I think one of the things that was talked about the last time that we were discussing this on Saturday, is that it does. I immediately want to interact with the pieces. I wanted to touch them. I felt compelled to reach out and engage with the piece. Right, I did. Um, but similar to Deandra, um, I think that was also because I knew most of the people, and there's a closeness, even though I may not be friends with all of them. Knowing of them, there's a closeness that makes me want to reach out and touch them, because the yeah, they're part of the community, but the pieces themselves feel lively. They reach out to you, they invite you in, right? um and they're beautiful. I think one of the ones with Ernesto, immediately what stood out to me was the pink nails. I think that was it. It reminded me so much of the conch, the lip of the conch. I immediately thought of that when I walked in, and I was like, it gave me that kind of, okay, the lip of the conch, I'm near an ocean, that. But after that, it kind of faded for me, right? I'm left wanting more, and the more that I sit with this, because I've been trying to really take in exactly what the artists attempt, similar to this environment. I feel like there's a rage because it's still not enough. It's just not enough, right? It's not enough because um, I think about the obligation to resist, right? And this seems like what we've always known in the Bahamas, that people resist internally, but they never, very seldom are queer people resisting externally. And that's a problem for me, especially because I'm one of those advocates trying to get people to understand the importance, right? Because internal resistance does nothing to structures. It doesn't change anything for structures. And yes, while Deandra pointed out that these do not feel like caricatures, as we often are, as I often am just walking through a store, right? Um, it feels like I'm looking at real people, right? That the wholeness of who they are is being portrayed, and that's beautiful. But I want more. I want more because in this country, like when I think about it, the drive here, I have to drive miles just to get here. And we had a conversation with Jody about this, right? TERN is a great space, but you have to interrogate the accessibility of the space, right? And once you get in the space, and I know that honestly, some of that isn't even your fault, because how many spaces are there really, right, for these kinds of works, right? And then what is the price, right, of you being able to do this kind of, and while the great team here is doing a great job, these are the things we have to deal with as queer people in the Bahamas, right? I think about um, talking about TERN itself. TERN is right opposite the epicenter of whiteness and capital. That's right over there. Those people, watch this, and Ide could tell you, the first time me and him got invited to a house out there, I was like, you know what? I'm really poor. I'm poor. I am poor. And in my own country. Ask Ide when we got invited. These people, they have second homes. And all I can say, I say, Ide, do you see this? Because I'm not sure I will ever have this in my own country.
Mm.
And that's my reality. Right? That's the majority of queer Afro queer people living in the Bahamas is reality. And so it's that I have to deal with again, because yes, I know Kivante, right? When I look at her, I know what that presence feels like when she's in the room. But I what happens when she leaves and it's just me? What happens when I don't have Deandra? What happens when I don't have Ide? Because he's all the way in Massachusetts, right? What happens? And that's what I contend with when I walk into this space, because there's an external resistance that we have not come to in the Bahamas. We just haven't arrived there, and I don't know if we're ever gonna arrive there, because on when you're on the ground, people don't see the need for that. You know, queer people don't see a need. They figure that as long as they're resisting internally, that they're doing a great job, right? That they're doing what they're supposed to do. But you have a duty to protect your fellow queer people. And that demands an external kind of resistance. And that's what I think is missing from the pieces, right? The pieces corroborate what I already know, right? That we hide. We're good at hiding. They corroborate what I already know, but the space. That you only know people are queer because either you had sex with them or you know someone who did. Or you know them personally and y'all are friends. But we don't want to wake that up. We don't want to talk about that. We don't, you know, we dare not say those things. And I am honestly tired. I am tired. I am tired of having to fight for my life. I live in a country, right? The Bahamian state churns out. It manufactures heterosexual citizens. We don't understand the implications of this, right? And in her work, Pedagogies of the Crossing, I think, Jackie Alexander, she talks about this, right? But again, you have to talk about, that's an outside perspective. And while I appreciate it, I need more of us in here to write about our experiences, sing about you, whatever you got to do, right? Because it's unless, and I get, and there's so much things happening, right? That I'm thinking about, that I really want to talk about and say. And I know time won't permit me that, but I think one of the things you have to take into focus is that the lens from the outside, if you've negotiated your queerness outside, it's radically different because you've had resources that, listen, I'm creating those, or trying to ask Ide. We sat there, right? And we try to come up with ways to get people resources from within this space. And then to have people who are in the queer community, who will not talk to me, who will not befriend me simply because of my external resistance. This is, and watch this, I'm not making this up. I'm not crazy. But they will make you feel crazy because they go around talking and saying, you know, well, you know, I think he has a great point, but it's the way that he delivers. And the question is, how do you deliver in a state or in a country where they're literally trying to get rid of you? What is the proper way to deliver when the Bahamian state is trying to erase us? What is the proper way to deliver when history itself does not even record us as a people? When the census itself does not take any statistics about our lives? And yet we're comfortable. And so again, when I come into this space, right, I'm forced to contend, and the rage just, it's there. I feel it all over again. It's an awakening of that rage. And so for me, when I think about the space, yes, it does all of that, but there's so much more that it just doesn't. And I try to look at all of the obstacles and barriers that would keep, right? Because we have to bring class into this, right? Because most of the people on these walls have degrees, right? Or they're part of a particular kind of class, right? This is not diverse enough for me, right? And I know that you put out a call, but especially when you have education, if you've studied history, you know that there's a resistance towards from the Black masses in particular towards the educated or the people that went off to London, simply because they trade or they use the hopes of the poor and the downtrodden to get them elected and then close the door behind them. You see it. You see it. And so in our work when we're doing these academics, and I've heard it myself, right? Because our education sometimes brings a chasm that's not even our fault, right? But we have to contend with that. We have to reckon with that and what it means. Jody telling me to wrap up, so I gotta go.
turn now. It's my turn now. So my name is Matthew David Rahming. I'm a visual artist, and I'm going to talk about the work now. I'm just taking that in, you know. I'm really trying to listen a lot today because I knew that I would come to the work with a kind of different understanding than you did. But even though this is not the first time I'm speaking with you, you know, I'm moved by how unaware I was of what you would receive from the work. You know what I mean by that? Um, but that being said, I think that two things really stand out to me about this work. I interact with this work as a visual artist because I see these works as tapestries. You know, they kind of the objects. I don't know if that's how April considers them, but if I'm thinking about them as objects and interacting with them in that way and thinking about art as a historical canon and the Bahamian art historical canon and the structure of that and the way that has moved and evolved, these works exist as tapestries. And there are a handful of those in the whole of Bahamian art making, and a handful of people who are able to produce them. So that is the first thing that entered the door for me, was the process, because it's apparent before the content, you know? And I think that I have to talk about that a little bit, because I think that when you attach that process and the history of that and what that means for other cultures and other spaces to what the subject matter is, it allows for an interaction. So basically for me, the first thing that the show says about me is, says to me is, April says, I am taking my queer brethrens and I am putting them in the Bahamian art canon, solidified, done. You know, it's not a two-way conversation. It's not an ask permission. It's not a maybe you'll allow me to be here. And it's a forever thing. It's not, you know, because there's no taking it back. Whether the work is seen as good, bad, whatever it is, now forever, we could pull it up, talk about it, have conversation about it. I could reference it in my UB articles or essays or whatever. All of that becomes what it is. And the next thing that I have to think about is I have to think about the queen, right? Now, you see these threads. So you have some preface on my relationship with the queen. But to be more specific, she's a statue to me. You know, like in a real way, in like if tomorrow she walked into the door and she said, hello, Matthew, I am the queen. Yes, kiss the ring. She would be a statue to me more than a person, because I understand that her position robs her of humanity, despite its successes and whatever it is and all of the stuff, and the fact that she is one oppressor in a long line of oppressors and all of that stuff. It's icing on top of the fact that if she moves outside of her function, her and her line go away forever. And they're no longer safe from any of the things that they did to others or to themselves, because that's a part of it too. They did it to themselves. And I think that the queen's relationship to monarchy and royalty is very much like white people's relationship with racism. It's a kind of self-sustaining thing. If I let this go, I will have to let go of all of the things that brought me here. And if I let go of those things, I won't exist. And so there's these two ways of struggling with this idea of existence. And that's what I kind of approach and I'm dealing with. And I think that as you look deeper into the works, there becomes more hints as to ways April is dealing with or talking about how people in these works are wrestling with existence in the real time, and then, as I said, presenting that to the Bahamian art canon and solidifying them there for contextualization, conversation, critique, and even for hating. Because sometimes we hate the work. And sometimes we hate the work not because it's poorly made or anything like that, but we hate the work because gay people in the work. And allowing people to have that interaction with the work, as dangerous as it is, and it's deeply dangerous, it's also deeply necessary. Because if people can't write the paper and say, I hate the work because they gay, then we can't say to them, you're incorrect for these feelings, and these feelings are, because we don't statistics nothing. I mean, where you just talked about that. So if there is no way, okay, if there is no way, I'm not sure what that means. Sure. Okay. I think that it is necessary for the work to be entered into the canon so that we could have both sides of the conversation in a way that is somehow manageable and like you could go back and look at it, you know? Because now other artists will respond to this work and expand the medium in that way. Other artists will make work that maybe isn't about this subject matter, but is presented similarly, and you'll have to rediscuss this work any which way. So there's all of these ways now that despite the fact that the government and the school system and this person will not address these conversations, you can't resist to talk about it now. And as quiet as these works are, because I understand your points about although they're loud and vivacious and all of that, they're still not as loud and vivacious as we understand the truth is. So I say, as quiet as these works are, I think they are still very knowledgeable of the fact that there is a vivaciousness and a loudness outside of this. Because I think that's a big part of the work as a visual artist too, is you have to edit the imagery so that when I give you what I give you, you don't accidentally start thinking about something else. And I think that this is a difficult body of work to do that about, you know? Because the recognizability of all of the figures is also apparent in all of these places as well. And I recognize these figures not for their queerness first either, but I recognize these figures because they're staples in the art community. And what I saw it as was April is advancing these people who have worked and aren't necessarily in a position to experience a kind of, you know, give back, kick back kind of thing. But this is the kickback right here. Them wings, I see Maddie wear them in person for no reason. So it's like this is my portrait to be hung above the fireplace now. So of course it don't look like me. It can look like me on a horse with a sword, you know. So I understand and I'm listening to all of those other things, but I feel like almost we can't expect the work to solve that because the work isn't supposed to solve that. And the idea of this, I want to touch on that, but this idea of resistance and all of that, and like what kind of resistance and when is resistance? Existence is resistance. And short of that, because I have to be able to be there. I mean, if I'm there, if you can't see my story, if you can't hear it, if you can't smell it, you can't interact with it because it's already being decided by everybody present that it's not fit for consumption, but this work is fit for consumption. And it is being consumed, and it will be consumed. So now the conversation has to be had. That's me. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. So you could go when you're ready. It on? Hello? Hey, y'all hear me? Okay. All right. So that's all I'm going to say about that. So April, you could go ahead if you're ready.
Oh, I thought I was just attending the panel and taking notes like we're in school. I can't hear anything in the room, by the way.
Apologies. If you would like to speak, you can, because in the last panel, Amanda offered words, and then we opened it up to a discussion amongst everyone. But we could also just go into a Q&A and discussion on this side if that's what you're comfortable with as well. So it's
I
your
mean,
go.
do you want to hear from me?
Do we want to? Yeah, everybody's saying yes.
Okay, well, I just want to say that like this panel is the I can you change the thing so I can see everybody? It's really hard for me to talk and stare at my face. How do I? That's perfect. Thank you. So this panel and all of the words and essays is exactly what I wanted to happen. Jody and Amanda can tell you that we've had the conversation many times about TERN's location. In fact, that was a big part of my hesitancy when I was approached, because I was told by my Grammy I could never go to that side of the island, and I never did growing up. In fact, only as an adult in my 30s have I ever been on that side of the island. So I'm glad that that's brought up. I do think it's a privilege to protest and to be resistant. And I think that's something that like we need to acknowledge. And also that as academics, sometimes we can be really up here. And I consider myself one of the obligations I do own as an artist is to be able to speak to just about every audience I can. If you have the gift of sight, that you can enter into the work in different ways. And I don't want to over intellectualize the work. And there's only so much I can do, right? I can't solve problems. We can't solve problems individually. And so what I was hoping for with this show, and what I feel like did get accomplished, is one, Bahamians are showing out internationally now. I can't tell you how many people in LA don't even know that we have issues with homophobia. They have no idea at all. In fact, your identity in LA is based on what you do with your genitals first. People want to know what you are. And actually, in LA, it's a privilege to be queer. Like, queers run the art world. Look at any gallery owners, like in the US and Europe. But also, like, I wanted to just show people being on Atlantica. So the imagery is what an alien would report back to this planet, right? And I don't want to show struggle. I don't want to show strife, because the way I see my community is that they are rulers. Like, this is just my reality. And so the word reality came up a lot. And I just want to remind everyone, like, I'm a nerd. Like, this is science fiction to me. This is speculative fiction. Like, I could go into detail about the materials I use. Like, in particular, like the tapestries are referencing how like humans show love to each other by printing and blowing up people they love and gifting it to the people they love. And like the titles are related to different aspect. Like a lot of us had to flee the Bahamas just to be ourselves, right? And that's a huge privilege in and of itself. And I think that the image of the Queen, a lot of you express how I feel about the Queen. I'm on the spectrum and I tend to take things very literally, and it's a big conflict in my mode of communication. And as a child, before I was diagnosed, when adults told me the Queen was the embodiment of God, I literally thought that she was floating in the sky when she wasn't on the TV, and she was watching me if I did anything wrong. It was a terrifying concept to me. Like, I really disliked the image of the Queen. I hated it on the money. I used to stare at that line print on the money for the longest time and be like, did she see me teeth my Grammy conch salad, or did she see me like eat the breading off the KFC? And it was things like that that caused a lot of like mental trauma for me that I'm still talking about in therapy. And then when I moved to the US and saw how celebrity the royal family is and how it's on the news if like they fart, and it's like it's so to me, every time I approach a piece, I act like I really am an alien here, and I'm asking these questions. I don't know if anybody's watched the show on Amazon Prime, The Man That Fell to Earth. So all of those genres of like an alien just waking up here on Earth and being like, what is this gender? What is the word fuck? And like how he learns the word for the first time and like screams it out, not knowing the context. I like to put in my work elements of pretending like you don't know the context. So someone explaining to me what the entity of this Queen Elizabeth is on Earth and her story and her lack of humanity is how I'm reporting it back to my planet. The tapestries are intentional also to relate it to how we use tapestries or have used tapestries to like solidify someone in history, but also keep idolizing them and saying the Pledge of Allegiance with these banners in our classroom. And my own third space of being an alien, right? So I do have African American family and Bahamian family, and neither of them quite reconcile either of those identities. So I come to the US and they're just like, oh, you took turtles to go to school and you speak funny. And in the Bahamas, right, at least from my perspective, growing up in the Bahamas, I kind of idolized Black American culture, like hip hop culture. BET was like what I thought Blackness was, the elevated version of Blackness. But when you come here, Caribbeans are seen a lot different to African Americans, right? Like a lot of us are seen as privileged. We didn't have to go. A lot of African Americans don't think Caribbean Blacks went through slavery. A lot of Africans believe that as well. So it's a Mod Podge, but at the end of the day, it's speculative fiction, and I only want to show what I think is my reality. And my reality is that these people are elevated. They're opulent. So the opulence isn't necessarily related to a queer aesthetic, because then I would have to be admitting that there is a queer aesthetic, and who set that aesthetic? And who's the author of that aesthetic? And if we get into real queer aesthetic, and of course, I feel like a lot of the time when we say queer, we're thinking about men. Like in one of the articles, I saw elite gay. A lot of women that are queer don't identify as being gay. We're leaving out aces as well, who are considered also queer. And so it's like, what does it look like to just have Black people chilling in a jungle that have plants where the flower is a Black woman's like long ass nails? Like, what does it look like to just be on vacation? Like a lot of my work at the CAM show was emulating the airport from the time you get off the plane to the time you get to your taxi, and all of the ads you see on the way there never show Bahamians unless they're serving a drink on the beach, right? And now we're back in the US and we have read the news that's coming out about Patrisse Cullors with Black Lives Matter. And it's still not solidified whether she did anything wrong. But the thing that I noticed was a lot of the right-wing news outlets decided to focus on the fact that she bought a $1.2 million house for her family in LA. Now, this isn't talking about the Black Lives Matter purchase. This is talking about her own personal finances. And a lot of people like vilifying her because she spent the money she earned because she's a New York Times bestselling author, and she's also a professor, and she also developed the first fully online MFA program, right? So I feel like white men don't get asked why they're selling their art if they're also an activist. I feel like white male artists don't get asked why they use certain materials, what it means, whether they're doing enough. And I know because I'm in shows where I have to do interviews, and my interviews are always different. They're always like, you need to tell us all of your secrets about how you made this piece. And then while you're telling us, we're going to give you suggestions on what you should have done. Men don't have to do that. And it's like, in my world and in my art, the authority is there because they're there, and you get to see it. You're seeing what already exists to someone who is living in the future. While simultaneously, and there's also a lot of satire, right? So like the Queen pieces are titled very satirically. One of them is titled with dialogue from a movie from a Black woman. And it's about like, this is how we would glamorize a tapestry of a monarch on Atlantica. And she's going to be jailed by fabric that's knockoff Chinese fabric that in and of itself is colonialism. And it was a way, like, sometimes I have to do things in my work to get over things. Like, does the Queen's image scare me still? Kind of, yeah. Like, I mean, just like in Get Out, like the white people congregating together and talking about Black features, that was scary. Like, I think all of the new genres, and in particular, I'm focusing on sci-fi and speculative fiction, they're morphing to erase these pre-established binaries, right? And so, like, there was a question in one of the essays that asked, like, if Atlantica doesn't have isms, why do you have currency? And a lot of those references are satirical. They're making fun of Earth. We've already evolved past that. Like, the currency in and of itself on Atlantica is so non-functional that it erases the need to even have money and have class, because it's just everywhere. That would be the equivalent of saying, okay, air is now the currency on Earth. So I mean, as long as we don't destroy Earth and get rid of the air or water, you know, the idea is that, like, this concept of trading things for things is so absurd that we just made it impossible to do. And Colonial Swag, the brand, uses colonialism as a raw material to create unattainable pieces of garment that earthlings can't acquire because they're still using regular currency. Now, is it important for me that everybody know these stories behind the work to see the work? No, because what's more important to me is that every audience can access it in a different way. So maybe if you think that, like, long acrylic nails on Black women is ghetto, well, maybe now you can see them as the focal point of a plant, as an orchid. The plants I use in the piece, I mean, I'm also looking for blurs to find things in the work. Like, I think a nerdy plant mother would see that I'm using all calatheas, which are the hardest, bitchiest plants to grow. Like, they need a constant source of water. You have to have 2 humidifiers in your house, but they're the most popular ones that you see on Instagram, and everybody almost always kills them right away because they are horrible. They can't have tap water. And that's also important, an important aspect of it that I don't need people to know, but I'm also looking for my people. Like, every time I talk about Atlantica, I'm talking about it. It's a fictitious planet, but it's an ideology as well. And the ideology is, we don't have to show Black suffering. We don't have to dwell on it. We can just refuse to accept anything less than the future that we can dream of. There's many other things, but the conversation is exactly what I wanted. I wanted rage, and I wanted anger, and I wanted an acknowledgement of the space being ironic. That's it.
I think now we're gonna open it back up to the panel, but I think it would be less disruptive if we just open up a Q&A at the same time. So does anybody on the panel want to give more views? Does anybody in the audience want to share? Yeah.
You started talking about the sci-fi aspect of it, and I think that what did I write down? I wrote down um, but you talk about sci-fi, and you're looking at like flexing this idea of reality into something else and reimagining. Well, not so much reimagining, but I guess the gist of what I want to say is I find it interesting how like Afrofuturism seems to be born out of like an idea that this space is not working, like directly out of that. And I think like even the points that you advance about like the way that Atlantica exists and what they do and how they interact, it is very much subversive. It's an antithesis space. It's a space that can only exist in fantasy, imagination. So it's almost like a double-edged sword, you know? So the artist becomes trapped in the place that's of absolute fantasy, and the real world is saying, hey boss, we need you to come to this place of absolute reality and bring your fantasy so that our reality could change. And it's almost like, but I wanted to comment on how, like, as an artist, being in those reality spaces disconnect you from the work and the fantasy, and also make the fantasy harder to make.
So, so this is, I'm glad we're going here, right? Because I just finished this chapter where I was talking about ignorance and how that contributes to um, the, the homophobia, the heterosexism within the space. And I had initially started this paper, but I couldn't figure out where I was going to go with it. And I started to do this work on memory, right? And then I got into, I've been reading. I read several books, and I got to the point where I was watching some stuff on YouTube, and this academic he postulated, or he argued, or she, I can't remember, that our memories, right? Sorry, no. Janelle Monáe was having an interview with Trevor Noah, and she said this thing. She said, the quality of our memories determine the quality of our life, right? And that struck me because I started to go in this rabbit hole to understand. I was like, okay, well, memories are socially constructed, right? They're socially constructed because we see, first and foremost, when I'm sitting here and experiencing Diandra, I explained this, me and Diandra the star, experiencing Diandra, I'm not experiencing this person here. I'm experiencing the collective instances where I had with Diandra all meshed into one. And bits and pieces of my brain are picking out those experiences, bits and pieces from those experiences to mesh together to say that that's the Diandra that I'm experiencing at this particular moment. And when you understand that, right, there's a particular kind of framework that's working, right? The quality of your imagination, because you talk about reimagining, is dependent on the quality of the memories. So when we talk about this idea, right? And this is because I'm trying to, because my attempt is to write the paper dealing with memory in the margins. Somehow I'm gonna work it. I don't know yet, right? But this idea of our memories, which is collectively happening, right? So when we think of majority rule, the idea behind majority rule is that the majority of people think that it happened. And when I, as a voice, contend in the paper that majority rule never happened because the playing field was never leveled, it's hard for them to understand that because all of them are bought into this idea or this memory that it was achieved. And that's how you know that memory, we need each other. We need the social framework that we're buying into. So capitalism is a collective way of remembering particular events of how to treat a human being. That, yes, but we buy into that memory, and that determines the quality of our life. So when I hear the word imagination, and that, I think, so that's where I was, when I critique Atlantica in particular, and you said that it was about your Black father, the question I have is, what were the qualities of your Black father's memories? Because then you get to understand the stories that he told you, which are the basis of Atlantica. And that's where I question.
Hmm. Is someone asking a question? We can't hear on this end. We can't hear it. Yeah.
A question for the panel is coming, guys.
Good night. Well, I just wanted to ask, getting from the theme of everything with colonial swag, I just wanted to ask a question. Um, Especially from my point of view as a, I guess you'd say a heterosexual male, um, well, a black heterosexual male in that aspect. I just wanted to point out that a lot of the black people in the communities have an issue with a lot of queerness. Is because back in the day the colonizers that you would or the slave owners and people they would use homosexuality as a punishment for slave men. Like they would use that to break them down, and so the disconnect with a lot of, I guess you'd say, heterosexual people, they feel that gay people are actually colonized because they're using or they're going by that aspect. It's not actually, it's kind of a weird way of thinking. They don't think of it as, okay, this person made a choice, it's the future, it's things have changed. It's like, it's basically two people coming together, making an agreement. They still feel like it's sort of like a punishment. And so that's why they feel like, yeah, so it kind of like,
1 second. Um, can you condense the question in?
sorry, it seems that there's the disconnect, and they feel that homosexuality is like tied to colonialism. How do you like change their minds because they feel like you're more closer to a white or yeah. So how is that? How do you connect and like better teach and understand like the masses?
Can I take
The,
this?
go,
Okay.
Ide.
Okay. So interesting question. Yeah. So I would say a good way of kind of reframing the argument or the discussion is understanding that queerness is something that's human, that's not tied to just one area or one second of history. It's a human thing that humans have done since the beginning of time, and that there is there is cases of it in West Africa from our ancestors engaged in queer behavior. Um, Even things they do now that we would consider queer, that they're exhibiting. So what when we frame it in that way, what you understand is that queerness came here through colonialism, not because of colonialism. Queerness wasn't enacted on our ancestors in a way to make them more colonialized or make them more subject to colonial pressures. So if you can, a good way is to just, I guess, think about what does it mean to love someone, and then thinking about how that love connects you to other people, and how in a society, understanding that love is something that creates bonds, and that queer or non-queer, that it is the love that you create between each other that gives you a sense of community. And so when you can see people who come with that kind of argument saying that, homosexuality was enforced upon the enslaved person as a means of, making them more malleable, you can begin to undo that kind of ideology, because looking at queerness as a natural human thing, that is something we have always done, it's something our ancestors have done, and it's not in any way disconnected from our humanity. Yeah.
I will walk around.
You want to say something?
I want to say that homophobia is a vestige of colonialism. I want to say that I think that a point that people often make in response to when we would say in the queer community that queer people we've always existed, we always will exist, right? We're often accused of romanticizing the past, and I don't think that that's the case. But I think I am going to say again wholeheartedly that all of these isms and schisms are a vestige of colonialism. So that homophobia, just bigotry on the whole, that is the vestige, or those are the vestiges of colonialism that's still been left behind. And I think that a lot of people within the community, I mean, while there are some of us who are constant and, you know, regular and active with our activism and trying to change people's minds, I think that there are more of us who are just, we've gotten to the point where I am what I am, and it is what it is. Some of us, like, April has created this space like Atlantica where Earth, just as it is right now, is ghetto. And it should not fall to people who are in marginalized communities to try to change the minds of the dominant culture, right? But I also want to add, and this is kind of a tangent, but that's so on brand though for colonialism and for capitalism to extract and exploit out of these marginalized communities and expect you to perform labor. Like they want your intellectual labor, they want your emotional labor, they want your physical labor, because their existence is pretty much contingent on yours being in the margin. Yeah. So
But but that's exactly it, right? We know that women do all of the work, right? Because the Bahamian nation in particular is built on the backs of Afro-Bahamian women, right? So they do all of the emotional work, right? Which is take care of the house, which they do not get paid for. And what do they get in return? Punched in their face. And we will not protect them, whether they're queer or not. We That's it. And the same goes. So you're right in that regard, right? Because when I think about the way that colonialism set up, right? Because I was thinking about how um, I think Alok had talked about how um, the paradigm that you just brought up, where you're talking about it falls to us. See, from my perspective, I already know that it falls to us, right? So the question is, what am I gonna do for me? And see, most people just go to, okay, well, that's not my labor. Even if it's being required of me, I really don't care. And I'm like, there are advances to be made, even if I'm not. And this is particularly me. There are advances to be made, whether I'm getting paid or not. Because the truth of the matter is, like you were saying, I think April, or Matthew, I think, I know I'm smarter than the system. My existence, so to Matthew's point about existence, yes, but my existence doesn't change the structure. Watch this, right? When the work that I'm trying to produce, I know that I will get paid at some point. So from my perspective, it's like whatever I'm doing, and in particular, what I've attempted to do is, if I'm ahead of the systematic structure, because the system is really dumb, right? In fact, it needs us to tell it where to go. It needs us. It needs our hands. It needs our feet. It needs our brains, which means that I'm smarter than this dumb system. So if you need me to tell you what to do, and if you need my labor, and if you need all of me in order for you to actually live, then hold up, then guess what? You're about to play my game. And see, that's a revolutionary kind of way of looking at it. I'm not resigned my life to this nihilistic kind of, oh, I'll just go through life and dissociate. Because dissociation does damage to you, not the system. So what I'm trying to get people to understand, and a lot of people think, well, I'm asking too much. Well, what you could do is either you stay there and do what you've been doing that maybe ain't getting you the results, or you do something different. And I've opted to do something radically different because, again, this system is dumb. It's never been smarter than any of us, no matter your education. No, watch this. You don't need a degree. You've always been smarter in this dumb system. Capitalism is dumb. It's literally dumb. But if we stay there and we do nothing, what's going to happen? Nothing gets done. That's why I think it's incumbent, right? Whatever you choose to do, however you choose to do it, but do something. There has to be an external kind of form of resistance, whether that's through singing, art, whatever. So I agree. This is resistance, right? It is entered into the canon, into the canon. Whether or not I agree with it, it's here. I appreciate that, right? My work is there, and if they want to critique it, they can critique it. I always tell people, if you like, I have no problem. Just write your piece, then I'll respond. That's all it is, you know.
Can I say one more thing on that point? Because I just okay, so you heterosexual man, self-identified, right? You ask the queer people about their position, and you made the point that homosexuality is a vestige from slavery, right? An add-on. That's basically what you were and I was trying to get the mic first because what I would like to do is to first check that, because the logic of that is inconsistent. It doesn't make sense, even as a factual statement. Um, Slavery didn't introduce homosexuality to Black people. Slavery didn't introduce homosexuality to the world, to Bahamians, or anything like that. So the idea is continental Africans would have experienced slavery, come to the New World, and then experienced not homosexuality, but sexual assault, and would have responded with aversion to sexual assault. And through both the lens of time and colonialism, it boils down to your ancestors were mad at homosexuality. But the truth of the matter is that statement, just as a statement of logic, is untrue. So it requires no defense from any queer person. Their existence does not have to be defended because they already exist. There's nothing in your authority of existence that allows you to ask and question their existence. There's nothing. There's why? It's a fallacy. And only because of our position inside and outside the cage, we are able to have the conversations with them from that place. And the truth of the matter is, in itself, it is an act of violence. And that's why they responded to it in the way that they did, because they were attacked.
Okay, yeah, I got you after. Hello, everyone. Um, I wanted to say something quickly, and then I had something to propose. Um, the fact of the matter is that slaves were sexually assaulted. There was sexual violence at play. Um, to assign that violence as either heterosexual or homosexual would be to assign a slave as a human. And slaves were not human in the eyes of the person that was enacting the violence. And so the first thing is that we can't split hairs on whether or not a violence is blue or brown or purple or pink. Violence is violence, and it was what it was, right? And so with that being said, we then realize that the nature of colonialism assigns a hierarchy. And as a heterosexual person, you are able to produce a product from said violence that then buys and allows into the system in the form of a child. And so you are assigned a rung above my rung, but make no mistake about it, none of those rungs is human. Right? Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Hi everyone, I'm Kevante. Um yeah, a lot of thoughts. Um touching on like what Natino and Matthew and Diandra and April said. I guess the first thing I really wanted to comment on the whole women do all of the work thing. I guess if you understand how I self-identify, then you probably would know this comment was coming. Yeah, I think feminine people do all of the work. I don't think it's just women. I think it's anybody who have feminine energy, they're assigned like, yeah. So women is in that conversation for sure. I don't want to exclude them, but it's feminine people. And I sit with your idea about like memory and rememory. And I'm very happy you brought up Janelle Monáe because this whole show reminded me of Dirty Computer. I'm very surprised that no one like touched on that. I was rocking with that album for, like the whole of 2018. Um, no, for sure. And I guess like your whole comments around like dissociating, and I guess I on a journey right now, like trying to, I guess, redefine dissociation, escapism, mental well-being, and just like grounding myself in just like my existence is resistance for real. And this is why I really, really like, can I curse? This is why I really fuck with Atlantica. Because it is an ideology that we really gotta tap into. Like escapism is the answer, and it is resistance within and of itself. In terms of just like how you were saying, like you need people to kind of like, and I do hear you on like people needing to like be more radical about their like truths in terms of just like what the struggle is. And while the struggle is like well and fine, and I do feel like it has a place, like at what point we gonna like be like, yeah, but we gotta tap into another ideology that gonna like help us to ascend into this like ghetto ass earthly realm. I think like just a lot of thoughts. Just a lot of thoughts. But yeah, I think that this idea that like I guess like memory is a social construct based on like all of these things that would have happened. I hear that. I think that's a very clever way of thinking about, I guess, just the human existence. And I understand like your whole like constructivist like theory. Um, I think like if we think about all of the things that we as individuals have been through, because everybody in this room have trauma or have know somebody that have trauma, and like the ways in which we cope, like I guess I want to argue, can it be critiqued as harshly, or I guess can it be critiqued at all? Because I feel like Atlantica is April tapping into, babe, this shit is ghetto. And I don't really want, like, I don't necessarily feel like I am a part of this. So I need to escape into something else that's going to keep me sane enough to be able to dwell here. And so it's just kind of like, can we even critique, like, reimagining, like, just imagination in general, or I guess, like, the ways that we cope with past, like, yeah, just memories. So I don't know if that made sense. I have other thoughts, but they're still like brewing. But yeah, that's kind of like what I wanted to say. I know Rashad wanted to pose something.
For everyone then. Because we kind of tossed a couple of things around. Escapism for some people is an answer, and kind of creating like an alternate reality. Your concept is grounded in kind of like an in-personness, but kind of like a radical in-personness. Do you believe, as the artist on the panel, that there is an unfair expectation on queer artists to create the work while also creating the history at the same time?
Anybody want to?
Yeah, so one of my first points was that I appreciate that the work troubles our understanding of queerness, right? So I think of in particular your piece, right? Mask off was a moment, is a moment. Love it. Um, Still is, right? And will be, continue to be, right? But I remember reading some of the critiques in particular, um, and something that someone had said was like, if you're going to show this wide range or these alternative masculinities, why could you not just show men doing like day to day things, right? And I thought about, well, this is your interpretation of these alternative masculinity is. You are the artist are producing the work. And so I understand that. I think that as if the whole conversation is about like existence is resistance, like, queer, like for queer people, like we're just here. Like I should not have to, everything that I do should not have to be intellectualized. I should not have to, have this theoretical groundwork for why I do the things I do or why I produce the art that I produce. So, but I understand that for some of us more than others, oh, sorry. Okay, for some of us more than others, it's important for our work to have that kind of duality, to have that like multifunctional kind of purpose. Um, so yeah, that's response. Yeah.
Hi, y'all. So I just wanted to give a arts admin perspective on this. So I think that the job of us as art administrators is to craft that language and that history for the artists. That's why it's imperative for us to have exhibitions like this in this space. So it takes the labor off of um, queer individuals that we work with, like April and so on, from doing that labor. So we help to craft the language, we help to deliver the language, we are purposeful about who we invite into the space to engage with the work. Um, and we then act with a certain amount of, we campaign for the artist, if campaign is the necessary word to use. And I think that it's important to note as well that April is very particular about who collects her work. And it's up to us as well to protect the work in that way through liaising with certain people. Is also up to us as well to if accessibility is something that April is, concerned about with the space, it's our job to ensure that we invite people in, that if, I had colleagues who wanted to come to the other talk, I picked them up in my car. You know what I mean? They don't live close to me, but I picked them up because it's my duty as a representative of the artist or art worker or cultural worker to ensure that people engage the works in these kinds of ways. And I also wanted to say, in regards to accessibility as well, as someone who works in the space, that I think back to being a baby queer in church and there being like a boat cruise. So persons, it was like a queer cruise or something like that. And my pastor at the time was at the forefront of persons to stop persons from coming on that cruise. So me, baby queer in, congregation, experiencing that, internalizing that. But then now me having the opportunity to work in a touristic space and say that I'm not only working and supporting an artist who is bringing queerness into the space. So when other persons who, so that persons who live here feel safe in this space to engage with this work, tourists who come in now can also feel safe in this work. So we're purposely crafting a safe space from two dimensions and melding worlds in a sense, that support April's practice. So I think that also lastly, that I the first time I went behind Life at Keys gates as well, I went on a job, to go. I was with a friend and she was like, "Yeah, my daddy working. I need to go pick this thing up from him." And I was like, "We could just go." And she was like, "Yeah, it's fine." And I remember the nervousness going through the gate. Um, and then once again, I only go in the back there if I need to, if to work. You know what I mean? To like put something up in someone's house or whatever. But in the same vein, I have to investigate within myself why I'm holding that if I've already given myself permission to exist in myself and in my body and in who all of I am, I have a right to be there. And even though that right comes through being of service, I can still exist in that space. It's hard to grapple with, but I think that the more that we challenge it and the more that we like understand that you can exist there, you can be there, that level of comfort is not going to come easily. It's not going to come just through and I see April shaking her head in the corner. But it's something that we have to work through, and I understand that my privilege in being someone who drives here every day helps me to see it in that way. But it's also my duty to also invite people in and to keep on like inviting people in and to keep on like breaking it down and breaking it down and breaking it down to the point where um you know, we have parties in the back there just for us and this, you know, somebody house who we know who owns it, you know what I mean? So I think that there's multiple things at play here, but my goal is to break down walls. And my goal is to break down conceptions on accessibility in this Western side of the world, because that's Bahama land and soil too. So I could stand there, if that makes sense. But I do understand that you do need permission to be in those spaces.
Another question?
Did you have something to say?
Not pressing.
So, what Kivanti was saying, and then a little bit of what Julie was saying. So I know for sure I've not been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure that I'm neurodivergent, right? But and I think that all Black people are neurodivergent, right? Simply because the way that we've had to exist in this white supremacist world, right? When I think about space, right, and to Jody's point about, I know for sure that I have the right to be there, but I'm always contending with who gets left behind. That's what this is about. Because if my trans brothers and sisters get left behind, then what does that mean? Like what are we doing? You know, that's what I think about. If if we fail to exclude the intersex people, then what does it matter that I'm behind there? You know, or what does it matter that I'm able to access space? Because again, when I think about community, and we say this so much, like I don't just say these, like I don't just say words for saying sake. Like I try to live them as much as possible, right? I can't do it all, but I try as much as possible. If I say that I'm in community with you, it means that I'm going to do my darndest or my hardest to ensure that you come along. Now, if you resist whatever this is, and Diandra can tell you, like we've had moments of that, right? Right? And I'm like, let's go. And she's like, nah, fam, you could go ahead. I'm good, you know? And I'm like, nah, because we've already made a pact. Now, you can either go willingly or I will drag you. No, because that's how serious I am about community. And so I don't want, while we get to go ahead, right? And I get it that sometimes Diandra's been telling me lately, some people just can't go, right? Because no, they just can't. They don't want to. And watch this. Those people, yes, I get it. But this fam, right? Those are fam, right? And for me, I have an obligation to ensure that we get to our desired destination. Whatever that means for them, I support them. And as long as we're doing that, I'm Gucci, right? I'm good. And I think that's what this is about, right? So for me, again, this space, I know I love what I've seen what you and Amanda have been doing. It works. It really does. I don't know how you do it, but it works. And so we appreciate that, right? We do. I don't want you to think for 1 second we don't. Yeah. Right. And so again. But yeah, so this work itself, I'm going to go back to this. Even though I have these issues, right? I know that that's where I am at on my journey, right? And I don't think that um that it takes away from what the attempt was and how it will impact others. Because I'm the only person who gets to see this. So and I think to Kivante's point, I about can we actually I understand that there are multiple routes to escape, right? I don't think that there's one route, right? Um, I stand firm on this. Harriet Tubman made 19 trips, 19 trips, and during those trips, some people some historians have stated, I don't know if it's matter of fact, but they've stated that sometimes when she would receive resistance, she'd take her gun out and say, "Listen, now I can't afford for mass of them to find out what I doing here." And I think that that's the kind of approach I take when it comes to it. That listen, Diandra, if you go in, is either you die here or you come. No, and that's a figurative, right? No, but I know it won't come to that with her in particular, but right? I know. I'm just saying that these escape routes that we're creating, they can be compromised at any moment. That's what it is, because the system is always adjusting to close up these routes, to get rid of these escape routes that we've made. And as long as these escape routes lead as much people out of the ghetto that we're in, out of the system, then yes, that's all it is.
What you was gonna say? Okay. So I noticed the conversation was going towards violence, so that's where I jump in. um, I think it's risky. Some of the things that we're talking about, the idea of Harriet putting the shotgun to the back is beautiful, romantic, puts me to sleep at night sometimes. It's beautiful, but it's hugely problematic because the truth of the matter is we can't have revolution that way in a real way in this world. Because, wait, I can't talk hard to people. I cannot talk hard to people. It's different. It's different. Like when you talk about invisibility and all of that stuff, some people, I notice invisibility happens like in a range, right? I have that 2-foot invisibility. You standing right next to me, your eyes close. I could engage with you and have conversation, close. And I mean, we know this. This is my space. This is the space that I work in. This touristic, half commercial, half academic space where people come to you and politely have the conversations about how you don't deserve to be here and stuff like that. No, I'm just saying that the idea of escapism is very real because some of us are not escaping because we might need to or eventually or it's ghetto, but some of us are escaping because it is a life or death situation. And I think that not really having the conversation like that does disservices to everybody, because the whole idea of life at key is not really accessible and it makes me uncomfortable. No, people just say shit to me when I come out here, not like in a figurative way or any. I mean, I was on my job the other day and I said good morning in the hallway. And as the person is walking past me, they say to their coworker, some people I just can't say good morning to. Too much people moving around. I don't have time to do it. I'm gonna keep it moving. And I don't say that so we could say, oh, well, woe was me or nothing like that. But I'm just saying that that same sliding scale of respectability politics and all of that, and visibility and invisibility, and who is marginalized and what, that shifts hour to hour, minute to minute, space to space, second to second. And marginalism only exists for one reason: power. It's all about power. All of these interactions and structures, it's all about power. It don't matter what the ism is. It's the same thing. At the end of the day, if I have that over you, I have things you don't have. So it's that needs to be addressed more than anything. It don't matter if you really understand the complexities of my point or anything like that, because the truth of the matter is it doesn't matter. I don't need you to understand the nuance of why I should exist. I need you to, when you see me, don't say nothing crazy, because if we have a conversation about violence and you having it with me, it's going to be different. Because
that's a note to end on. This was I've been texting Ramel, our backend support, and I don't know if we had questions on StreamYard or YouTube, but thank you guys on the online end of it for your time. Thank you so much to our panelists in April for sharing and being honest and bringing your whole selves present here today. Diandra and Natino could tell you, I was like, I'm excited. This is gonna go great. Yeah, because there was so much nuance here and so much varying levels, and that needed to be discussed. So I'm very happy about that. Thank you guys in the audience for coming. You guys were great, and thank you to our directors, Lauren and Amanda, for allowing us to have this event here tonight. Yes, so good night, everyone. Hey.